For over 17 centuries, pilgrims visiting Jerusalem have traced the Via Dolorosa, the Way of the Cross, the final steps of Jesus traveling from the place of judgment to the cross. In this episode of our series, The Way of Jesus, we reach the Way of the Cross, and we will trace the first 8 stations of the traditional 14. At each station, we will hear scripture and learn something about the account presented by our gospel writers and by church tradition. As the first rays of dawn glimmer into the pit where Jesus may have been imprisoned beneath the house of the high priest, Good Friday is just beginning. Just as Jesus was lowered into the pit, so he may have been drawn up to face his trial. Psalm 69, 13 through 15 reads, "But I pray to you, Lord, in the time of your favor. In your great love, O God, answer me with your sure salvation. Rescue me from the mire. Do not let me sink. Deliver me from those who hate me, from the deep waters. Do not let the flood waters engulf me, or the depths swallow me up, or the pit close its mouth over me." As day is breaking, Jesus is brought before the Sanhedrin, the temple court, to be tried for blasphemy. This court met in a room in the temple shown in this model of first century Jerusalem. Luke 22, 66 through 71 reads, "At daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. 'If you are the Messiah,' they said, 'tell us.' Jesus answered, 'If I tell you, you will not believe me, and if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God.' They all asked, 'Are you then the Son of God?' He replied, 'You say that I am.' Then they said, 'Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips.'" But it was confusing. Once Jesus had been condemned to death, the temple leaders did not have the authority to carry out the sentence. Thus, they had to appeal to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. This is a bust of Pilate, who we know was appointed Roman governor of the province that included the Middle East. In the Nicene Creed, he is named, and thus implants our saving history into secular history records. But Pilate is also confused and not sure what to do. But it was confusing. Once Jesus had been condemned to death, the temple leaders did not have the authority to carry out the sentence. Thus, they had to appeal to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. This is a bust of Pilate, who we know was the appointed Roman governor of the province that included the Middle East. In the Nicene Creed, he is named, and thus implants our saving history into historical records. But Pilate is also confused and not sure what to do with this obscure dispute. Luke chapter 23, verses 1 through 7 reads, "Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes the payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king.' So Pilate asked Jesus, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' 'You have said so,' Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. But they insisted. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. Then he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction. He sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Herod Antipas was the tetrarch, or governor of the province of Galilee, the area where Jesus' ministry had taken place. He was probably in Jerusalem for the Passover. Little did he know that Pilate would draw him into the drama. Still, when Jesus was presented before him, he was initially intrigued, for he had evidently heard that Jesus was a miracle worker. Years earlier, upon hearing of Jesus' ministry in Galilee, Herod feared that Jesus was John the Baptist, risen from the dead. But Jesus stands silent in the face of Herod's questions. Luke chapter 22, verses 8 through 12 reads, "When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies." This chapel, lovingly tended by the Franciscans, has the name Flagellavit, meaning flogged. It is located near the beginning of the Via Dolorosa. As Jesus is dragged back to Pilate, the drama continues. Luke chapter 18, 29 through 38 reads, "So Pilate came out to them and asked, 'What charges are you bringing against this man?' 'If he were not a criminal,' they replied, 'we have not handed him over to you.' Pilate said, 'Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law.' 'But we have no right to execute anyone,' they objected. Then Pilate entered the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' 'Is that your own idea?' Jesus asked, 'or did others talk to you about me?' 'Am I a Jew?' Pilate replied. 'Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?' Jesus said, 'My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the local leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place.' 'You are a king, then,' said Pilate. Jesus answered, 'You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me.' 'What is truth?' retorted Pilate. With this he went out again to the people gathered there and said, 'I find no basis for a charge against him.' Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. But the temple leaders pressed on. Pilate decided to appeal to the crowd who had gathered outside the place called the Stone Pavement. The paving stones before this chapel date back thousands of years. John 19:12 through 16 reads, "From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the temple officials kept shouting, 'If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar.' When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat as a place known at the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. 'Here's your king,' Pilate said to the people. But they shouted, 'Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him!' 'Shall I crucify your king?' Pilate asked. 'We have no king but Caesar,' the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. Matthew 27:24 through 31 reads, "When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. 'I am innocent of this man's blood,' he said. 'It is your responsibility.' But then he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. 'Hail, King of the Jews!' they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him." Station number 1 is the Chapel of the Condemnation. In this one location, Jesus is tried, beaten, and finally handed over to be crucified. In his Stations of the Cross, the Reverend Canon John Peterson writes, "As we come to this first station, God turns everything we hold so precious absolutely upside down. All the things we hold so dear, wealth, power, security, are replaced by a crown of thorns." John 19:16 through 17 reads, "So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Station 2 marks the place where Jesus received his cross. Here, pilgrims stand on beveled flagstones of a Roman road, the original Roman pavement dating from the 1st century. For all victims of violence and for those who commit violence against others, Lord have mercy. Christ have mercy. Lord have mercy."